Comienzo de nuevo. Bueno, buenas tardes, bienvenidos. Vamos a comenzar la sesión. Bueno, dándole las gracias a la Fundación Aga Khan por tener la oportunidad de explicarles algunas de las experiencias que hemos tenido en Venezuela y en algunos países de América Latina.
In some countries of Latin America.
Podemos recordar que en Venezuela en el año 2000 hubo un grave problema de flujo y que causaron
in Venezuela in 2000 there was an enormous flood.
Que causaron la desaparición de una parte muy importante de la costa de la ciudad de la costa del Caribe.
The disappearance of a very important coastal region.
Eso fue una emergencia total.
It was a total emergency.
Desaparecieron todas las trazas de la ciudad.
All the traces of the city were eliminated on the coast.
Y que hubo que acceder y proponer primero cómo actuar en situaciones de emergencia.
So we had to propose how to act in a situation of emergency.
Y segundo, pensar
And secondly,
qué podíamos nosotros hacer para recuperar el territorio.
And secondly, think what can we do to recover that territory.
Damos las gracias por esta oportunidad.
We thank you very much for this opportunity.
Y esperemos que pueda ser el comienzo de una relación entre nosotros.
And we hope that this can be the beginning of a relationship between both our academies and yourselves.
Bueno, gracias.
Thank you. That's me. And now on to ¿de acuerdo al programa?
¿Viene José Luis?
Yes, José Luis is now going to talk.
Okay, I'm going to present the speaker, no? The speaker is going to be Dr. Alejandro Liñayo. So I would ask permission to share screen. Is it possible to share the screen?
You will be sharing the screen, right?
Yeah.
Okay, please share it.
Okay.
It's coming.
Okay.
It's coming, sorry.
It's there, yeah. It's there.
Second one. Okay. Well, I'm sorry. Okay. Are you looking at the screen now?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well.
It's visible, yes. Please proceed.
Yeah. I'm trying to put this in the. Well, okay. Alejandro Liñayo, he's a systems engineer with a Master of Science. Wait a second. Is that? I have a problem. Okay. In organizational research, he holds a PhD in education, social sciences, and also he conducted doctoral studies in human sciences. He has a post-degree specialization studies in operational research in urban risk management, Spain, in international cooperation and United Nations systems at the United Nations University, and also in disaster damage assessment at the Pan American Health Organization, PAHO. He's a consultant, researcher, and lecturer in emergency systems management, disaster planning, and integrated management of natural and technological disaster risk scenarios. Actually, he works as CEO of the Research Center for Comprehensive Disaster Risk Reduction, CIGIR, no? Well, so I let now Dr. Liñayo to address the people here in this meeting. No?
Okay, thank you very much. Let me share my screen. Okay, I got it. Okay, I think that everyone can see my display. That's okay? Hello?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Hello.
Well, thank you very much. Good morning to our friends in Venezuela. And I don't know if any other friend from Latin America is here today. Good afternoon to my fellows in Spain, and of course, good night for our friends in Afghanistan. It's really a pleasure to be here. I will initially thanks to Marta and to Frank for the coordination that makes possible to be here in this workshop today. And I also want to thank to the Venezuelan Academy of Engineering and Habitat for allowing me to share with you as a speaker some of our experience and lessons in our efforts to reduce the impact of disaster both in Venezuela as in other countries in different continents of the world. Initially, well, I decided to give the name to this presentation of lesson learned about disaster reduction after the Vargas disaster of December 1999. No? And I will try to address my presentation around three central themes. Initially, I want to present some experience and lessons learned from the national disaster reduction efforts promoted in Venezuela, particularly by the academic and scientific actors after the Vargas disaster of 1999. After that, I want to describe some other relevant initiatives and contributions that have been promoted by Spanish and Venezuelan academic actors to support disaster reduction efforts mainly at the Ibero-American context, but you will see that we have done also other initiatives in Asia and in other countries, okay? Finally, I would like to open a short space of discussion to check how relevant could be this experience to support disaster and reduction efforts that are actually promoted by the Aga Khan Agency for the Habitat. So that's the summary of the presentation. Initially, of course, I want to mention something about this important disaster that struck Venezuela in December of 1999. No? The Vargas disaster that impacted Venezuela that year was for sure one of the most devastating hydroclimatic disaster ever recorded in the Venezuelan history. No? This event was triggered by the several rainfalls that affect this area of the country during a couple of weeks. This rain affected the north slope of the Cordillera of the central coast of the country, as you can see in here at the top left of your screen. No? This image also shows and illustrates where we have the highest levels of rain. This level of rain saturate the soils of the high basin of the mountains, resulted in the activation of a large number of landslides, as you can see in the down left photography. And of course, this scenario dragged an enormous amount of vegetal and geological materials that was violently moved along the multiple water courses that can be found in the area, until crashing in multiple points of this narrow strip of urbanized area that is even today occupied by the population of the state of Vargas. One of the first aspects that became evident after the disaster was the fact that this type of phenomenon in the Vargas region cannot be classified as an isolated or as an unexpected event. No? In fact, after the event, several studies came to light showing that this kind of hydrological processes that triggered the disaster of Vargas are indeed events of recognized historical recurrence, and that around 20, maybe more, of similar events are known that have affected this region of Venezuela starting in the year of 1740, that is the middle of the 16th century, and the last important disaster that struck in that area the dates are back to 1951. I personally believe that one of the documents that best describe this historical recurrence of this type of phenomena in the Vargas area is a small publication that was written by Dr. Eduardo Roll and published by the Academy of Natural Sciences of Venezuela in 1950. In this document can be found a very detailed description of all previous records and evidence that suggests that the frequency of this kind of phenomenon in Vargas. No? It's very interesting to mention that at the conclusion of this document, you can read this. No? The lines on this report must be a warning about the high level of risk exposition to landslides and debris flows that will be exposed to those who decide to build their house near water courses that burn in the high mountains of the central coast of the country. Additionally, this information must promote in government authorities the decision to forbid any kind of edification that could be planned in areas considered dangerous. That was said in 1950. An interesting circumstance, an interesting aspect that happened after the Vargas disaster was the strong commitment of the Venezuelan scientists and academic sector to support actions that would prevent similar disaster and calamities in the future. One circumstance that favored this effort was that the authorities in that time of the new created Ministry of Science and Technology in Venezuela, who at that time, in fact, were Dr. Carlos Genatios and Dr. Marianela Lafuente, two very distinguished academics and researchers who today are part of the Venezuelan Academy of Engineering and Habitat. So they defined that one of the priority initiatives to be promoted by this new Ministry of Science and Technology will be the design and implementation of a national program of applied research for disaster reduction. And that was an effort in which I had the pleasure to coordinate together with Dr. Raúl Esteves between the years 2000 and 2007. No? The main politic defined for this ministry was science and technology for the people, and for this program, the main politic defined was the necessity to move from a disaster response approach to a new disaster risk reduction approach. Okay. I have a guidelines in here to avoid to forget anything. Okay, the process that took place to create this national research agenda, applied research agenda on disaster reduction, was indeed very, very interesting. No? In order to define what could be included in this national research agenda, there was an interesting process and a lot of workshops. We spent 8 months, more or less, trying to discuss with different actors, hundreds of actors and institutions from different disciplines, to identify what could be the most important aspect to be included in this national agenda to focus it on the reduction of disaster risk. Finally, as part of this project, this agenda included 12 thematic lines, and it's the line that you can see in this slide, no? Starting from education and capacitation, identification and characterization of multi-hazard scenarios, technology for building, retrofitting, and urban vulnerability assessment, risk and public administration, vulnerability of public service. And well, as you see, there was a lot of different areas included, and not only areas related with the engineering or physical science. There were also a lot of areas related with education, social studies, cultural studies, economical studies, etc. Perhaps the most practical expression of this national research agenda on disaster risk reduction is this matrix that I'm sure that no one of you can read, but it offers you the idea of what kind of how was organized all the thematics and all the challenges that must be attended. No? In here you can see in the top in purple, the color purple, each one of the 12 thematic areas of priority that need to be attended. And for each one of these areas was defined a number of between 4 and 8 specific projects that need to be attended. The priorities to be attended as part of this effort moves in the thematic lines from the right to the left, and for each one of the specific projects identified from the bottom to top. No? And well, based on this, we start to work promoting different initiatives of technological development and applied research to be attending each one of the 89 priority projects that were identified as necessary to attend this huge challenge of reduce disaster risk in Venezuela. I think that this experience has been presented in different conferences and forums in which we have been invited in different countries around the world. And this experience is also published in some technical papers, and even are included in one chapter of this book that you can see in here in your screen. The name of the book is Climate Events and Disaster Mitigation. This book was promoted by the Center for Science and Technology for non-aligned countries, non-aligned nations, or other developing countries. It's in fact in India, in New Delhi. I spent some time there and also some time in Sri Lanka working and cooperating in this kind of regional comparative study, no? Trying to identify what kind of project could be found in the countries, in several countries of Asia and Oceania and Africa, and even some experience at the Midwest countries that could be interesting to move on in this effort that want to be pushed from the policy to the practice. Additionally, I want to say that this publication is also available, can be downloaded from research or repositories in ResearchGate and in academia.edu. In there you can read the details of this experience. With the time, the possibility to continue working with the national institutions of Venezuela on these issues was not so easy. Venezuela, as you know, started to be involved by the huge crisis, political and with a lot of problems. And based on that, we start to find possibilities to continue working in this kind of studies in other countries of Latin America, initially in North America, and later in other spaces. No? For us, it was very interesting to try to understand how to face the challenges that disaster resolution present for Latin American countries, and what could be defined as an appropriate agenda for disaster resolution to this particular regional context, no? Where you know that there's a lot of structural problem, a lot of inequity, a lot of challenges, weaknesses in urban planning and urban management, and different problems that for sure complicate the effort that you could try to do there, no? So the answer of what to do in this background is very complex and need to be understood before any effort of implementation. Probably one of the most interesting works in which we have been part and that we have conducted on these issues was a regional research that in which we worked for the Ibero-American Development Bank. This was a study called the Identification of Financial Strategies for Adaptation to Climate Change in Water and Sanitation Sectors in Latin America and in the Caribbean. No? This is a study that we did starting analyze with the analysis of the different models and scenarios defined by the international IPCC, you know what it is for sure, and based on what is suggested by these models and scenarios, we start to identify what kind of specific strategies and investment could be done to mitigate the effects of climate change in components of water and sanitation, in the sector of solid waste, and particularly in one in which I will be talk a little more in a few minutes, that is in how to improve national capacity to reduce disaster related with floods and debris flows. As a result of this study, we create once again a consensus methodology that could be promoted to attend the challenge of reducing disaster risk related to extreme hydroclimatic events in Latin America. This agenda include 5 major areas of action. No? Initially, you will find an area that is essentially diagnosis, and of course, it's all what you need to know in order to have an idea of where are the problems, where are the weaker points that you have to attend. And in this case, you will find hydroclimatic monitoring network that reinforces this network, hydrologic studies of watershed, determination of sediment production, etc. No? All these kind of studies that can be done by the scientific and academic actor, but that are focused essentially in diagnosis. After that, there are 3 main spaces of intervention that we identify. Initially, we identify the areas of intervention focused in the prospective approach of the problem. In this case, we are talking about the possibility to intervene scenarios and tendencies that, if you don't intervene right now, probably will allow the construction of more spaces exposed to risk in the future. No? So in this area that we call prospective risk reduction, we include watershed planning, urban planning, land planning, urban control, the definition and laws and normative that could regulate the way in which people use the land, that kind of things. A second area is defined as corrective measures to reduce disaster risk scenarios. And in this case, we are talking about the designing and implementation of engineering work that could reduce some level of risk that you can identify today, that today exists, and in which could be possible to improve, to create, to promote some infrastructure to control erosion, to dams, to mitigate the damage, potential damage of a flood, works for control and rotation of sediment, even works to reinforce infrastructure, etc. No? And finally, there is the usually the most common of the aspect of intervention that is related with this, what we call reactive measures to move on disaster risk reduction. And in this case, we are focused not on risk reduction, but on disaster preparedness and response. No? In this case, very important what need to be done in the implementation of effective early warning system. Is also very important to work in emergency and disaster planning and that kind of things. No? Finally, a fifth area was included, focused in some transversal action that were recommended to guarantee the continuity of the force, particularly taking into account the weaknesses that you can find at the Latin American countries at the time of implement long-term policies as this one. As a result of that study, you can see that we not only work in a characterization we create of how is the efforts that were taking place in each country of the subcontinent at that time. No? We create also some national index of commitment to measure the comprehensiveness of the efforts that were taking place for each one of these areas that I described before. No? So which country is doing better efforts on diagnosis or in prospective disaster reduction or in corrective or even in the efforts to reinforce the capacity or reaction and response in case of disaster. And here you can see the results that we show after that study to show the integral evaluation that we found for each one of the countries. This was published also by the Inter-American Development Bank. The whole result of the study are distributed in 10 technical documents that can be downloaded from the documentation center of this bank. Beyond this regional research, comparative research, we have also worked during the years in the characterization of different multi-hazard scenarios in different countries. No? In the Academy of Engineering and Aviation of Venezuela, there is an interesting thing of great of engineers with a lot of experience in the characterization of this kind of a scenario. Particularly, we have experience working in modeling of areas that could be affected by flood, debris flows of flood. No, we have also worked in the mapping of seismic microsonic threats, in the local exposition to the risk of tsunamis, also in the preparation of map for landscapes of your geomorphological trees, and even in the preparation of potential scenario of technological hazard that can be found in different urban spaces, and that can be triggered by natural events. No, that could be. I'm talking this idea of the natural event that can trigger it. Technological disaster. I think that it's very important to mention that in many of these works, we have tried to do as much as we can in order to promote that these studies could be used not only to present a paper, to publish a paper in a prestigious international scientific magazine, or to be invited to present our results in a congress. We have always tried to find ways in which these results could promote the assumption of some public policies that indeed can reduce some level of risk. In this aspect, I think that it's very important to mention the work that has been done by Professor Jose Luis Lopez, that in my opinion is the most important reference in the study of floods and debris flows, risk, and the design of solution to mitigate this kind of risk in Venezuela. He and his team at the Mechanic of Fluid Institute of the Central University of Venezuela not only have been working in the preparation of these typical maps that show what could be the urban area that could be affected in case of a flood or a debris flow. They have also studied a lot of the best option, the best design that could be used to mitigate this kind of risk. And after that, they have once again modeled what could be the damage, the areas affected by the same flood, with or without the presence of these mitigation solutions. No, that, in my opinion, is a very important apport to that you can bring to decision makers in order to let them understand how important is to spend money, to invest money in this kind of solution. And of course, at the first time they will see that there's a lot of money and maybe I can pay, but if you compare that with the money that you could be saving, maybe you'll be able to take the decision in a easily way. No, same kind of effort have been done trying to deal with the seismic risk scenario. No, in Venezuela. In the first year of this century, very interesting efforts were done in order to create a seismic microsonic map for the most important cities of the country. These seismic microsonic maps give you today a very good idea of what could be expected. This have been done for the city of Caracas, the capital of the city. You know, with this information, how could be the ground shape, the physical characteristic of the ground shape that you could have in each point of the city. But beyond this seismic study, we have done before some analysis, preliminary analysis, to have an idea of what could be the affectation actually in the urban structure that you have in the city based on these previous results. No, to advance on this, We have also the support of great experts on seismo-resistant and retrofitting and seismic engineering, and they have bring some information that allow us to define a probability of exceed the specific level of damage for different earthquake scenarios in the city. No? So in here, you can see that you can have the map of the urban area, and you can identify in the colors for each one of the edification if the probability of damage in each one of these buildings is high, is medium, or is low. No? These results are very important for different actors. No? Initially, we have worked with some actor of civil protection, of emergency response, and of course, if they know that in this area you have a lot of red or purple edification, you must work priority your emergency plannings and your capacitation programs on self-protection for communities in those areas. No, for local government for the local government, we also have bring some tools in order to facilitate, to organize, and to promote, for example, urban renovation in those edifications in which you can find that the level of risk or the level of vulnerability is too high. No, in this case, what we said to the people that work at the local government is, okay, if someone comes here asking for a permission or how much money they must pay for a tax to demolish this edification, and you see that the edification is in red color, do not ask them anything. Let them do that demolition as fast as possible, because that's a warranty that a new edification will be done following the new normatives and recommendation, and that will allow you to change one red point in your map for a blue or a green point. No? Well, and finally, I would like to mention in this part of this presentation that I would like to say something also about some of what seems to be one of the most challenging and unsolved problems that need to be faced by disaster risk reduction today. You know? As you know, probably, all the statistics that can be found in the world that show how have been moving the impact of disaster around the last 50 or 100 years show that the impact of disaster have been growing continuously, at least during the last 50 years. No? So, of course, we have always said that it seems that we have been doing something wrong in our efforts to reduce the impact of disaster around the world. No? It's very interesting, in my opinion, that some recent study shows that it seems that we are still doing something wrong. No, based on that, what I want to mention is that I remember that maybe 1 year ago, a little more, 1.5 years ago, the International Science Council bring a worldwide report of the midterm review of how is going the time framework for disaster reduction around the world. United Nations asked this to the International Science Council to prepare a report that could suggest if the world will reach the goals to reduce disaster and that were defined by 2030. And this report mentioned that the world will not reach that goals. And in fact, in some aspect, probably in some aspects we will be worse in 2030, based on tendencies in this worldwide force for reduce the impact of disaster. No? When you ask why these resources are not good, one of the main problems that the International Science Council defined is that we need to do more and better efforts to promote disaster governance based on evidence to guarantee better results in our efforts to reduce the impact of disaster on the world. In fact, I didn't know this, but I found that just 1 year ago, less than 1 year ago, the General Assembly of the United Nations, based on the result of this report, create another resolution adopting the recommendation of this report and saying that it's very important to move forward in the improve of effort based on governance to reduce the risk of disaster. In order to have a basic notion about what governance is, it's very important to mention that governance demand to recognize that the challenge of reducing the impact of disaster today is so broad and so complex that no single government in the world can address these goals alone. The only way in which you could do something sustainable in reducing the risk of disaster is working with all the actors that are part in the society. Three main actors are mentioned in this aspect. No? Initially, of course, are the government and institutional actors, but there's also a strong role that could be played by private sector and also a strong role that could be played by social actors. The idea of governance is that all these three actors must work together in decision-making and the co-responsibility, understanding better the co-responsibility that they have in the construction of urban risk scenarios and in the understanding of the causality that can be found behind each disaster. No? To do this is recognized also, it's important to understand the way in which science and technology must offer solutions, must offer tools to promote this process of governance. Of course, that these kind of declarations have moved in different countries. They decide to work and to have guidelines and to prepare plans to strengthen governance for disaster. No? In our case, we can mention that on year 2020, 2021, we prepared also a consultancy for the government of the Republic of Panama that was called Guidelines to Strengthen Governance for Disaster Risk Related to Extreme Hydroclimatic Events. And this report that we prepared was the base for the third goal of the quinquennial program assumed by the government of the Republic of Panama to promote the prevention of water-related risk scenarios that is part of their national plan of irric security. But I think that the more important that these efforts that are focusing on demand from the high level of government, for us it's very interesting also to understand the meaning that could have governance, citizen empowerment, and right to know in low structural regional context and more at the grassroots level, working with communities, working in local spaces or local cities or small cities. No? To move forward on this, we have found that it's very important some experience that we have in the use of the inclusion of layers that have information of social aspect that seems to be crucial to promote comprehensive efforts for local disaster reduction in some area. No, in this aspect, I want to mention some experience working in the preparation and use of social vulnerability studies or social perception of risk. That kind of studies have shown us that are very useful tools to promote better implementation process to reduce local disaster reduction in some areas. No? Additionally, we have worked also in the use of new technologies to promote the socialization and citizen empowerment of information about their specific level of exposition that can be found in different areas of different countries. No? For example, in the use of some application that we have in which we have been working since 2017, more or less. This has been a very interesting experience, completely learn by doing essay and yes, a learn by doing process, no? In which we started using the most classical software and technological tool, basically on the practical use of these tools in the specific characteristics that can be found in our countries, shows that maybe the best and the solution with the highest levels of technology are not the best option for most of our countries. No, so we have been forced to work in the use of tools that with characteristics that include not only full-time access 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, but also need to be a solution that need to be 100% free, so must be developed, created only using openware tools, okay? It's important that this solution should have any cost for maintenance, zero cost for maintenance. I mean, cost for cloud storage or license for the use of particular software, no? And of course, we also were forced to create solutions that could work with a minimum internet band and with a very low level of resource request for the smartphones that could be used by the users, because that's what you will find in most of our countries. No? To show some of the solution, painfully, I didn't have time to translate this slide in English, but this is the description on one of the first solution that we create in this thing. Is created for a city in the east area of Venezuela. It's called Cumaná, the city, and it shows you, they bring you information about 4 specific kind of local hazards that have been identified for the city. No, we are talking about earthquakes, floods, landslides, and geological hazard, and also the risk of tsunamis. And well, the idea is that the user can ask to the application what could happen in this specific point in which I am standing right now, no? Or in this specific point that I can select in my smartphone, no? And based on that, the tool brings you also the specific recommendation that you can follow for these select points, no? These tools have also been used not only in Latin America. 1 year ago, more or less, we created a couple of these tools for some important cities here in Spain. The first one was in Aranjuez, and the other one was for Alcalá de Henares. And in this case, the tool was focused in the socialization of flood risk scenarios that have been identified for these cities. It's very interesting to mention that usually in development countries, you think that in development countries, the problem of disaster risk reduction is solved, and you have a strong institution that will solve the problem, and all the people is safe, and that's not in deep or experience. No, I want to share with you a short app. Painfully, you will not have some, but well, in here you can see a short video. I don't know if you will have the audio, but let me share this with you. It's a few seconds, just. Okay. Well, this case happened in September 2021 in a small town of Covisa in Spain. It was a result of a river flood in a watercourse called La Degollada. And when we try to understand what happened here, we found different interesting things. The first one is that there were enough local information about the exposition to this kind of risk for this town. The studies were done by some national institution. In fact, the models that they have describe with great detail what indeed happened in this town. No? The point is that the inhabitants, the citizens that used to live in this area, had no idea at all that they were exposed to this kind of risk. And this is something that we have found in different countries, even in the United States, in which we have been working in some emergency scenarios, and where you find more or less the same. No? The importance of this study case is that once the disaster struck and you ask to the people what is their opinion, what are their complaints about what happened, they do accept the institutional response that they receive from civil protection, for the fire department, from emergency institution, but what they demand is that they don't have enough information at the moment when they decide to rent a house or to buy an apartment. So they say that this idea to have an early warning system that will allow them to have a warning 2 hours or 3 hours before the event, the disaster, is not enough. They probably will appreciate more if they have 2 months or maybe 2 years before, because based on that, they can assume and take better decisions at the moment of identify where to invest, where to live, where to select the schools where I want to put my kids to study, and that kind of things. No? Finally, I want to mention that recently we have been working in a new tools, okay? Once again, that have been done to socialize the level of exposition, in this case specific to seismic hazard. This is a work in which we are working right now with the National Institute of Geography of Spain, and the idea is to have an application that could bring information to the citizen of how could be the kind of ground shaking that you could have in each point of Spain in case, or based in the maximum maps of maximum seismic intensity that have been done for this institute in Spain. Okay, of course, this institute has been doing a great job. All the technical information that you want, you can find it in their webpage. But this information is not necessarily comprehensible for a common citizen. A common citizen doesn't know what means that you have a 0.35 Gs or 0.12 Gs of acceleration or any other of these kind of technical parameters that we like to use. They need a more visible, a more flat approach to the information. Well, that is something in which we have been working right now. Okay, indeed, this was the slide that I prepared for this first contact. But I must say, and this is something which I would like to know, what is your opinion, Marta? But I read that in some of your emails that someone in this group was interested to talk a little about this aspect related with the reactive disaster risk reduction actions, no? That means, okay, what could be said about emergency and disaster planner or the user of incident command system? So I include 3 slides, maybe additional, to talk a little about these issues, but I don't want to do it if it's not necessary. Okay, if this is not interesting, okay, maybe we can stop in here and start to share, to open a conversation, no? But if you find that it could be interesting to talk a little about this issue, let me know. And of course, for me, it will be a pleasure to share a little of our experience in this specific aspect of emergency and disaster planning.
I think we should, what should I say? Go ahead.
Thank you very much, I think, for this incredible presentation. A lot of learning over there, and we have time if you have 3 more slides to talk about. Actually, I requested Marta to include it in the list, as I'm working in the Department of Disaster Risk Management and Community Development. So that were the suggestions. So we have the time. 10 more minutes for this explanation, then we will enter to a question and answer session. Thank you very much.
Okay, that's okay. Thank you very much. Well, if we have the time, it will take just a few minutes because it's just a brief comment about this issue.
Perfect.
So what I want to mention in here is I took some slides of a short course that I offer for the Crisis and Disaster Management Program that is offered by the University of Central Missouri in the United States. They usually invite me to offer some classes on these issues. What I want to mention here is that for us, and based in our experience, not only as scientific and academic that study this war of disaster and emergency, but also as operative, part of the operative team that have been involved, that have been working in several disaster scenarios in different countries of Latin America. we have learned that it's very, very important to identify and to understand the difference that you need to take into account when you deal with emergency management system and when you are dealing with disaster response systems. That's, in fact, a conceptual aspect that I think that usually is forgotten in many countries, particularly by the person in charge of the emergency management system. No? The point in here that people used to confuse the conception of what is a disaster and try to face the challenge of disaster coordination and disaster planning, thinking disaster as if a disaster could be taken as a major emergency, and that's not true. Initially, it's easy to know that emergencies are in fact events that are characterized by the frequency, the daily occurrence, usually are treated and handled on organizational models, no, and works very well when are supported on specialized protocols. But in the case of disaster, the main characteristic is that extraordinary qualities of the event that by definition will exceed the capacity that you have to attend emergencies. And in this case, it's very interesting to understand that the response that could be implemented must be less mechanicist and more organicist and based in distributed capacities that you can find in the whole element of the system that could be affected by the disaster. No? So when you talk, when you work, and you are working in the design of emergency and disaster planning, it's very important to identify in which organizational scenario you are working. You can have the responsibility to work in the preparation of emergency or disaster plan in what we call hard organizational structures. I mean structure as the armed forces, some institution, the fire department, and in those cases, the use of hard methodologies for the design of this disaster planning, of course, are the best. No? What characteristics you will find in this kind of hard structures? You will find vertical structure, disciplinary. Usually you will find that are supported by pyramidal or organical designs, no, with a normative or legally defined leadership that are very clear, with the structures of control and communication that are very clear. That's the kind of thing that you find in hard structured organization. No? But in the other side, you have soft structured scenarios and organization in which you are talking about a community where the leadership is not necessarily clear, is far from being normative. In this case, the leadership can be defined as charismatic using the characterization defined by the sociologist, German sociologist Weber. So in this case, you need to work more with horizontal structure where no formal control mechanisms are identified. So in this case, the whole dynamic changed, no? So incident command system have proved to be a very useful structure when you need to respond to major emergency scenarios in which several agencies respond at the same time, and you need some kind of coordination between all these agencies to respond in a better way for this major emergency. But in our opinion, and that's what that's the message that I offer to my students, is that incident command systems have limitations. And the limitation can be found or appears at the moment in which the incident command system comes near to deal with big disasters scenarios. Basic idea that support this statement is that you can understand the way as society respond to disaster using the basic aspect of crisis theory. No, you can define that a disaster is a jump. Okay, it's a violent jump in the condition of the environment of a society, and once this jump appears, the social system start to adapt in a kind of learn by doing, and it's try and mistake process, no, until the system once again lands in the new scenario. Okay, in this model, you identify a pre-crisis moment before the strike, a crisis and resolution time in which the system is trying to adapt to the new condition, and finally a post-crisis. And you can define in here also something that is very important for us, that is called what we call the time of resolution of the system. Time of resolution is the time that happens between the moment in which the system suffer the first impact of the perturbation, and finally when they land and adapt to the new circumstance. So from our experience, what needs to be promoted in disaster planning, I'm not talking about emergency planning, I'm talking about huge disaster planning. The key is to do as much as possible to reduce the time of resolution. What you are looking for is to reduce the time in which the system land and get equilibrium with the new conditions. Because this time, as long as this time is, worse will be the scenario, and this means that you will have more human casualty, more material damage. The situation will be worse. So what you need to do is to create the conditions in the system that will allow a faster resolution to the new conditions that you will find after the disaster. We studied this, well, many years ago when I used to work in the university at the Center for Simulation and Modeling. And we found, trying to identify what could be the math that is behind this behavior, that what you find when you try to understand how a society responds and adapt can face the challenges of a disaster scenario is that it seems that this process could be ruled by the principle of self-regulation of complex system is core, no? That is one of the core ideas that you can find in the chaos theory. So you can find, if you want to see how this could work from this particular point of view, is that what you will find is that the time, okay, in which the system will land to the new condition will depend on a specific parameter, and this parameter can change based in three aspects. And from these three aspects, two can be modified with clever interventions. No, the first aspect that you can promote in the system to guarantee shortest resolution time is what we call the internal cohesion level of the elements that are part of the system. And the second element is the internal capacities that you can see, that you can strain in the element of the system. So the idea is that if you work from this approach, maybe you won't have the control, okay, to guarantee that this square approximation to the disaster operation will be handled in the first moment of the emergency, but you will have you can believe that the system will respond better if the system has been previously reinforced in the way that it must be reinforced. So that's the only thing that I can mention right now about this. Yes, that was my last slide. I think that one of the weaknesses that I found, particularly when I have been working in this issue in developing countries, is this point that I'm mentioning here. Of course, in developing countries, you have very strong emergency response structures and a lot of firemen and resource for emergency response. And they believe that in the case of an earthquake or a big flood, the dynamic will be that the citizen will call 911 and the fire department or the emergency vehicles will come and bring you some support. They don't know that in a disaster scenario, that never happened. In a disaster scenario, probably you won't have a phone line that will allow you to contact the emergency department, and probably you won't have roads that will allow to these vehicles of emergency can reach the place where you are. So the idea of who will be in charge of the first moment of the response is not the institution, is not the emergency response unit. The first response will be done by the same community. And that is in that way because it's a disaster. It's by definition. I remember that I was invited after the 9/11 attack in the United States to be part of a think tank, no, trying to understand what happened and why we fell in the response during the emergency. It's interesting to mention that once that the first tower start to burn after the attack of the plane, the New York Fire Department creates the operational center of the incident command system in the floor of the second tower. So they didn't have an idea about what was going on. And of course, people used to say, no, the problem is the initial information failed. Of course, as happened in any disaster that can be classified as a disaster. So this is, in my opinion, very, very important to understand. Well, that's it. Thank you very much for your time. And well, I think that could be great to have some time to share ideas about whatever you want.
Oh,
Thanks,
well, thank you.
Thanks, Alejandro, for this interesting presentation. It was, I think, a nice review, general review of the strategies for disaster risk reduction. We're going to continue with the program, and